Imagine a landscape so demanding, so brutal, with its thin air and high altitudes and endlessly harsh winters, that for generations, historians basically just wrote it off as a dead end for ancient humanity.
Yeah, completely written off.
Right. We are traveling today to the mountains of the Republic of Georgia, specifically this massive, rugged highland region known as the Javakheti Plateau. And for a very long time, the prevailing assumption in archaeology was that this region was just, an isolated, miserable outpost.
Oh, absolutely.
A marginal environment where ancient people just barely scraped by, huddled in these dark military citadels and totally cut off from the dynamic, thriving cultural centers down in the valleys.
Exactly. I mean, the historical narrative always painted the highlands as this frontier of mere survival.
Mm-hmm.
It was assumed to be a place you only went if you were, well, pushed out of the more fertile, comfortable lowlands.
It's like a last resort.
Right, a last resort. It was certainly never viewed as a place of innovation or a hub of deep, continuous cultural exchange.
But as is so often the case when we stop assuming and actually start looking, the Earth itself has a completely different story to tell. A much richer and, honestly, a much more surprising story.
It really does.
Sitting on the desk between us today is a stack of incredibly fresh research that is fundamentally rewriting how we view ancient human society in the South Caucasus. We're diving into a brand new 2026 archaeological paper published in the journal Antiquity.
A fantastic paper, by the way.
Yeah, it's authored by Roberto Dan, Torniki Chilingurashvili, and their entire international research team. And to help flesh out the narrative, we're pairing that paper with an excellent companion article titled Echoes of the Javakheti Plateau.
And these sources are really the culmination of 8 years of incredibly rigorous, groundbreaking fieldwork by the Samtskhe-Javakheti Project.
The SJP, right.
Yes, the SJP. That's a joint Georgian-Italian initiative, and they've been out there in the mountains since 2017.
So our mission on today's deep dive is to take those 8 years of sweat and mapping and excavation and discover how this hidden highland culture wasn't just surviving the cold, they were actually thriving.
Right, thriving.
They're creating this dynamic, deeply connected cultural crossroads that lasted for millennia.
Okay, let's unpack this. Before we can even talk about the physical artifacts they pulled out of the dirt, we have to talk about the detective work.
The methodology is key here.
Because we are talking about one of the least explored, most intimidating regions in the Caucasus. You can't just, walk out into a vast mountain range with a shovel and hope you stumble over a lost civilization.
Exactly. The sheer physical scale of the Javakheti Plateau is daunting. You're dealing with vast, sweeping stretches of high-altitude terrain.
Right.
If you just rely on traditional archaeological surveying, which usually involves walking the land in a grid, looking for visual variations in the soil, or maybe stray pieces of broken pottery, you're going to fail.
You'd just be wandering forever. You would completely miss the forest for the trees. Or in this case, you'd miss the ancient settlement network because you're just staring at a pile of rocks. That's why the SJP utilized what archaeologists call a multi-scalar approach.
I read that term in the paper, and the results of that approach are honestly staggering. Since 2017, they haven't just found a few campsites. They have identified 168 distinct archaeological sites.
It's an unbelievable number.
Spanning all the way from the early Bronze Age straight through to medieval times. I mean, how does a team even begin to locate 168 hidden sites in a place that big?
Well, it completely shatters that old idea of isolation, doesn't it? To find that many sites, they literally had to start from the sky.
From the sky?
Yeah, they relied heavily on remote sensing, GPS mapping, and geographic information systems, which is commonly known as GIS.
The way I was picturing this GIS technology as I was reading the sources, it's almost like a doctor using an MRI on the landscape.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Because if you and I just look at the surface of a plateau, we just see the skin, the grass, the modern fields, maybe a weirdly shaped hill. But this remote sensing technology allows archaeologists to look beneath that topsoil. Am I getting that right? How does it actually see what's underground?
The MRI analogy is actually spot on. Because remote sensing doesn't just take a photograph. It measures different wavelengths of light and energy bouncing off the earth.
Okay.
For example, you can detect minute variations in soil moisture or vegetation growth. Think about it. If there is a massive ancient stone wall buried 2 feet under a grassy field, the grass growing directly over that stone wall can't put its roots down as deep.
Oh, wow. So it gets less water.
Exactly. It gets less water. So from a satellite or a drone equipped with the right sensors, you can actually see these crop marks. They're these faint, ghostly outlines of ancient walls,
Right.
the perimeters of massive enclosures, the foundations of forgotten homes.
And it's all mapped out perfectly before a single shovel hits the dirt.
Yes.
That is incredible. They are literally seeing the skeletal structure of the region right through the grass.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is that mapping these 168 sites wasn't just a high-tech treasure hunt. It wasn't just about, dropping pins on a digital map so they could go dig up artifacts.
Right. There's a bigger purpose.
By using GIS to map the spatial distribution, meaning exactly where these sites were built in relation to each other, to water sources, and to mountain passes, they were actually mapping ancient human behavior.
They were looking at the connections.
Right. They were answering the question of how did these ancient people move across this highly demanding land? How do they organize themselves to survive?
So they're looking for the invisible highways, really, the connections between the sites, rather than just the isolated sites themselves.
Precisely. They are seeing the macro network. And once they had that macro level view, that MRI of the landscape, they could then make highly strategic decisions about where to actually spend their time and money to go on foot and start excavating.
Which makes total sense. You can't dig up 168 sites at once.
No, you definitely can't. So they chose the most prominent, complex sites that could act as keys to unlock the timeline of the rest of the plateau.
Which brings us to an excavation right in the center of the plateau. A massive mound called Baraleti, Natsargora. And this place, the name alone gave me pause when I read the translation. Natsargora translates to the Hill of Ashes.
It is a profoundly evocative name, and as the SJP team found during their intense 2023 and 2024 excavations, it is entirely scientifically accurate.
They actually found ashes.
Oh, layers of them. Baraleti Natsargora is what we call a deeply stratified site. As they dug down, they found occupation layers that go all the way back to the early Bronze Age, around 3500 BCE.
Wow.
And those layers just stack up continuously right through to the Iron Age, ending around 500 BCE.
3,000 years of history in one mound. But it's the way those layers are stacked that really caught my attention. The paper describes recurrent burning episodes.
Yes, repeatedly.
Over and over again for thousands of years, this site experienced massive, catastrophic fires. The archaeologists found thick layers of ash intermixed with fallen stone, the remains of substantial defensive walls, and the burnt remnants of Iron Age domestic homes.
Right. The physical layering of ash and stone is a literal geological record of destruction and rebuilding.
It's crazy.
It's a cycle of violence, whether from warfare with neighboring groups or maybe just accidental fires in tightly packed wooden and stone structures, but it's followed by incredible resilience.
Okay, but this is where I have to push back on the logic of these ancient people for a second. If I live on a hill and my neighborhood burns to the ground, maybe I stay and rebuild.
Yeah.
But if it burns down a second time or a third time over a few generations, I'm moving. I mean, why on earth do people keep coming back to rebuild on the exact same pile of ashes century after century instead of just migrating down to a valley that is slightly less prone to recurrent disaster?
Well, it's a very logical question for a modern mind to ask. We are so used to mobility today. But this is where we have to fundamentally shift our perspective to understand how ancient communities viewed their landscape. The fact that they kept returning to the Hill of Ashes despite the destruction proves that this specific location possessed a deep, non-negotiable importance.
Okay, so what made it so important?
First, we have to look at the practical, strategic side. Baraleti is a prominent mound right at the center of the plateau. It offers sweeping visual command over the territory.
You used to see everything.
Everything.
Right.
If your group controls that hill, you control the surrounding natural resources, you control the trade routes, and you can see enemies coming from miles away.
So the defensive advantage outweighs the risk of burning down. You just don't give up the high ground, even if it means rebuilding your walls from scratch every century.
Exactly. The high ground keeps you alive in the long run. But it's also about psychological and ancestral anchoring.
Ancestral anchor.
Yeah. Imagine your family line. When your ancestors have lived, died, shed blood, and rebuilt on a specific patch of earth for 1,000 years, that earth becomes deeply sacred. Your identity is tied to that specific hill.
That's a really powerful way to look at it.
You don't abandon it. You honor the ashes of your ancestors by building your own home directly on top of them. It's a profound statement of permanence in a chaotic world.
That makes a lot of sense. It wasn't just stubbornness, it was their identity. But if this place was just this gritty, constantly burning survival bunker, What about art? What about culture? Because there was one artifact they pulled out of Baraleti that seemed to completely contradict the idea of just scraping by.
Ah, yes, you're talking about the bronze solar disk, officially cataloged as SJP-025.
Yes, there is a beautiful drawing of it in the sources, and it is currently housed in the local Akalkalaki Museum. It's this finely decorated circular bronze piece.
It really is beautiful.
It has intricate concentric bands of these little raised knobs, really sharp geometric angular motifs, and regularly spaced perforations around the edges. It doesn't look like a weapon or a tool at all. It looks like high art.
It is a stunning piece of proto-historic metalwork. And by proto-historic, we mean the period just before these cultures started leaving extensive written records.
Right.
So their art and their objects are their documents. Creating a disc like this requires specialized metallurgical skill. You need someone who understands how to alloy, cast, and intricately tool bronze.
You need a master craftsman.
Precisely. This disc is a key piece of evidence linking the people of Baraleti to a much wider regional tradition. These bronze solar discs are linked to solar imagery and cosmology, naturally, but they are also deeply tied to funerary display. They were placed in graves.
Wait, I remember the paper mentioning similar graves found elsewhere in southern Georgia, but who are these discs usually buried with? I mean, was this for the kings or the warlords?
Well, that is the most revealing part. Comparable examples of these solar discs found in the broader region are specifically and consistently associated with female graves.
Wow, wait, really? So the highest status burials featuring this complex, symbolically rich metalwork belong to women.
Yes, which tells us an enormous amount about the social fabric of the Iron Age Caucasus. It forces us to completely re-examine the status of women in this society.
That is fascinating.
It also tells us about their cosmological beliefs, perhaps connecting the life-giving power of the sun to specific female community leaders or ancestors.
It changes everything about how we view them.
Most importantly, it proves they had the surplus resources, the time, and the specialized skill to create complex, beautiful symbolic art. This absolutely was not just a grim utilitarian military outpost. They were creating beauty amidst the ashes.
We see this incredible macro-level resilience at the Hill of Ashes. But surviving a fire and burying your dead isn't the same as really living. When these people finally retreated behind their massive defensive walls at the end of the day, what did their daily lives actually look like?
That's the big question.
And that's what the second major excavation site in the paper reveals. I want to move us eastward across the plateau to Megreki Fortress. And the way they found the specific site is just wild to me. The paper notes it was partially exposed by modern road construction.
It really highlights how the ancient world is often sitting just inches beneath our modern infrastructure. A bulldozer scrapes away a layer of dirt for a highway, and suddenly you're staring into a 3,000-year-old living room.
It's crazy to think about.
And Megreki, much like Baraleti, is another deeply stratified site. It shows continuous reoccupation starting from what archaeologists call the Kura-Araxes period.
Let's clarify that for a second. The Kura-Araxes period is essentially the early Bronze Age, right?
Correct. It roughly spans from 3,400 to 2000 BCE. The Kura-Araxes culture is famous for their distinctive pottery and their ability to migrate and thrive across mountainous terrains.
Okay.
So Megreki starts with them, continues through the Iron Age, and amazingly stays occupied right up to the 4th through 15th centuries CE.
But the antiquity paper zeroes in specifically on two excavated spaces, rooms 1 and 2. These are domestic spaces like actual homes dated to the late Iron Age. Specifically, the paper calls it the Achaemenid Horizon, roughly the 6th to 4th centuries BCE.
Right, and the Achaemenid Horizon is a fascinating era to find here. This is exactly the time when the massive Achaemenid Persian Empire was at its peak, exerting its vast economic and cultural influence all across the ancient world.
So finding artifacts from this specific window tells us how these highland people were interacting with global superpowers.
Exactly.
Inside these late Iron Age rooms, the SJP team found clay installations. Given the context, there were likely hearths, ovens, or raised platforms for preparing food. Now, here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, definitely.
These clay ovens weren't just functional, muddy fire pits. They were decorated with fired clay plaques. And these plaques featured intricately incised and painted geometric motifs using red, white, and dark blue pigments.
The deliberate use of color is what makes this discovery so significant. When we try to imagine the ancient highlands, we almost always default to a very monochromatic world.
Right, lots of grays and browns.
Gray stone, brown earth, maybe some dark, tarnished bronze. But here, inside a mound fortress, we have vibrant red, white, and especially dark blue geometric patterns decorating the literal hearth of the home.
And the researchers make a point to note that this kind of colorful clay iconography is incredibly rare in the South Caucasus. They've only found parallels at a couple of neighboring archaeological sites in the region. Getting pigments, especially blues, back then wasn't exactly easy, right?
Not at all. Creating stable blue and red pigments often required mining specific minerals, processing them, and having a really deep understanding of chemical reactions during the firing process.
So it was expensive and difficult.
Yes, it implies robust trade networks just to acquire the materials. This raises an important question, though. What were these colorful plaques actually for? Are we just looking at ancient interior decorating? Did someone just want a prettier kitchen?
I mean, human nature hasn't changed that much. We still like nice kitchens. But the researchers argue it's much deeper than that, don't they?
They do. These specific recurring geometric patterns and the sheer rarity of the pigments suggest these plaques might have marked high-status domestic spaces.
Oh, like a status symbol.
Exactly. They were a way for a prominent family to signal their wealth, their trade connections, and their social position within the community to anyone who entered their home.
But I'm also thinking about the placement. It's around the hearth, the fire, the absolute center of life. Could this be an intersection of daily domestic chores with ritualistic belief systems? Like you're baking your daily bread on an oven that is actively displaying your society's cosmological beliefs.
Precisely. We have a really bad habit in the modern world of separating the domestic and the sacred into completely different buildings.
Ooh, right.
We have our homes and we have our places of worship, but in the ancient world, those concepts were tightly intertwined. The hearth was often a sacred space.
So the oven was kind of an altar, in a way.
Yes, and the fact that we see these specific patterned plaques at Megreki and at a few other key neighboring sites suggests a shared visual language across the plateau.
Right.
They weren't isolated at all. They were communicating with each other through a shared language of art and architecture.
Okay, so let's pull back and look at the whole picture for a second. We have 168 sites mapped from the sky using remote moisture sensors. We have the 3,000-year-old ancestral ashes of Baraleti.
Right.
We have a complex bronze solar disk linked to female leadership or cosmology. And we have vibrant red and blue clay plaques decorating ovens in a mountain fortress linked to the era of the Persian Empire.
It's a lot of incredible data.
It is.
Yeah.
So what does this all actually mean? How do we take all of these incredibly specific puzzle pieces and use them to completely rewrite the history of the Javakheti Plateau?
Well, to really grasp the impact of this research, we have to look at how archaeologists previously categorized the massive stone ruins scattered across this region. For decades, they were broadly referred to as Cyclopean architecture.
Right, named after the Cyclops from Greek mythology, because the dry stone walls are made of these giant, massive boulders.
Yeah.
The Greeks thought only a mythical giant could lift stones that big.
Exactly. And because of the intimidating, massive nature of these stones, the assumption was always that these were purely military citadels.
Just huge forts.
Yeah, it was thought they were static, permanent defensive structures built by an isolated, warlike people trying to keep the world out.
If I can use a modern analogy, they looked at these ruins and saw a modern border wall, or maybe imposing brutalist architecture. A fortress designed to say, stay away.
That's a really great way to put it. But the Samtskhe-Javakheti Project is actively dismantling that entire concept.
So,
If we connect this to the bigger picture, specifically that macro-level MRI map of all 168 sites, these fortresses don't look like static military border walls anymore. A new, much more dynamic theory emerges. Many of these megalithic fortresses likely operated as temporary refuges.
temporary. Wait, so people didn't live in them year-round?
Not necessarily. They were highly utilized by mobile pastoralist groups, people who herded animals, during their seasonal movements across the mountains. Or they were used as shared community shelters during brief times of regional insecurity.
Ah, so instead of a permanent military base, it's more like a fortified highway rest stop or a massive communal storm shelter. It's built heavily because it gets a lot of intermittent use by people passing through.
Exactly. I want to read a direct quote from the Antiquity paper because I think the authors perfectly synthesize their findings here. They write, "The SJP highlights a landscape structured by recurrent settlement patterns, resource exploitation, and symbolic practices, an arena of mobility and negotiation rather than isolation."
An arena of mobility and negotiation. That is such a powerful phrasing. It completely flips the old narrative on its head.
He really does.
These ancient people weren't hiding in the mountains, terrified of the outside world. They were actively navigating the highlands. They were negotiating with the harsh landscape, and likely negotiating trade and culture with other nomadic groups moving between the high peaks and the lowland steppes.
It changes the Javakheti Plateau from a dead end into a vibrant cultural frontier, a place where highland traditions and lowland imperial influences met and mixed. And the SJP is far from finished. This is an ongoing project with years of work ahead.
Right, the paper outlines their immediate next steps. They are going to be using rigorous radiocarbon dating on all the organic material they found to pin down the absolutely precise timelines for all these layers of occupation.
Yeah.
And they are also integrating environmental and ethnographic data, which I thought was really interesting.
The ethnographic data is key. They are studying how modern and historical shepherds and pastoralists move through this exact same landscape today.
To compare the patterns.
Exactly. By understanding the modern seasonal rhythms of the plateau, they can better deduce how the ancient Kura-Araxes, or Iron Age people, might have navigated those same mountain passes. It's a truly interdisciplinary effort to bring this lost world back to life.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to bring this back to you, the listener. It is so incredibly easy to fall into the trap of thinking about human history as a straight, clean line of progress.
Oh, definitely.
But what the Samtskhe-Javakheti Project shows us is that history is messy. It's layered in 3,000 years of ash, and it's defined by incredible human resilience. These were ancient people who carved out beautiful, culturally rich, highly organized lives in one of the most demanding, rugged environments on Earth.
They really did.
They built massive walls, they burned to the ground, they rebuilt on the graves of their ancestors, and they left behind intricate bronze solar discs to guide them in the dark.
It's a powerful reminder that human ingenuity, the drive to connect, and the desire for colorful cultural expression aren't limited by geography, high altitudes, or harsh climates.
Absolutely. And I want to leave you with one final thought to chew on today. Think back to Megreki Fortress.
Yeah, the road construction.
Right. Think about the fact that an entire, deeply stratified ancient settlement, a place where real families lived, cooked, and painted beautiful red and blue geometric designs on their hearths, was partially exposed simply because someone in the modern era decided to run a bulldozer through the dirt to build a road.
Wild.
It really makes you wonder, tomorrow as you drive to work or walk down your own street, what other vibrant, lost chapters of human history are hiding directly beneath the concrete of our own modern infrastructure, just waiting for the Earth to be moved? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious.